The clock ticked past midnight when Lisa stumbled into the hallway, her hands trembling as she clutched the old box she had found hidden under loose floorboards. Her chest heaved with fear as she opened it, expecting dust and forgotten trinkets. But inside lay a stack of yellowed documents and a birth certificate with a name she didn't recognize. Her pulse quickened as the walls seemed to press in closer. Lisa whispered, "No, this can't be right," the words catching in her throat. The house was silent, too silent, as though it had been waiting for her to make this discovery. She dropped to her knees, clutching the paper, her breath ragged as the truth began to claw its way into her reality, tearing apart everything she believed about herself. Morning light filtered through the blinds, but Lisa sat frozen at her kitchen table, the papers spread before her. Her hands clenched into fists, as if holding herself together. Every sip of air felt sharp and heavy. Her mother entered the room, humming softly, unaware of the storm building in Lisa's chest. Lisa stared at her, searching for answers in her face, in the tiny lines that marked years of love and deception. "Why didn't you ever tell me?" Lisa's voice cracked, heavy with betrayal. Her mother faltered, her hum collapsing into silence, eyes widening as though she had been caught in a trap she never thought would spring. The weight of years pressed down on both of them, the room thick with the ache of a truth unspoken. The silence dragged on until it felt unbearable. Lisa rose from her chair, her heart pounding in her ears, her body trembling with a fury she struggled to contain. Her mother's lips parted, but no words came. Instead, she looked down, ashamed, her hands twisting nervously in her apron. "Tell me everything," Lisa demanded, her voice stronger now, fueled by the fear gnawing at her insides. Her mother's eyes filled with tears, her shoulders sagging as though the weight of decades pressed down at once. "I thought I was protecting you," she whispered, her voice thin and broken. Lisa shook her head, choking back tears, the betrayal piercing deeper than she could bear. The truth once hidden now cast its heavy shadow between them. Lisa's knees nearly buckled as she listened to her mother recount the days she had been brought home, not as a child of blood, but as a desperate act of love. Her mother's voice cracked with every word, describing secrets buried in shame. Lisa's mind spun, fragments of childhood memories shattering as she pieced them together under this new truth. So all of it, my life, it wasn't mine? Lisa's words carried both pain and disbelief. Her mother reached out, her hands trembling, but Lisa recoiled, the touch unbearable in that moment. The walls seemed to close in, the air heavy with grief and betrayal. Every word etched scars across Lisa's heart as her identity unraveled thread by thread. That night, Lisa lay curled on her bed, the documents spread around her like shards of glass. She traced her fingers over the names she did not know, the family she had been torn from without memory or choice. Her body shook with sobs that seemed to have no end, her pillow soaked with grief. The world outside went on, indifferent, while inside her room the universe had collapsed. Every photograph on her dresser looked like a lie, every memory suddenly poisoned. She whispered to herself, "Who am I now?" The words echoed into the darkness, unanswered, leaving her hollow. The silence became unbearable, filled only by the sound of her own broken heart pounding against the weight of the truth. The attic felt suffocating, every beam creaking under the weight of secrets Lisa had never been meant to uncover. She sat cross-legged on the dusty floor, surrounded by papers that no longer seemed like relics but weapons cutting into her sense of self. She picked up the letter again, her fingers trembling so violently the words blurred. "To the child who must never know," it read, and her breath hitched, chest burning with confusion and grief. "Who am I?" she whispered, her voice breaking the silence. The attic pressed in closer, moonlight slicing across her tear-streaked face, shadows stretching like hands eager to pull her deeper into truths she wasn't ready to face. Her heart raced, and the air seemed to grow colder as her reality cracked apart. By dawn, Lisa stood in the kitchen, her reflection fractured in the fogged window above the sink. She clutched the letter like it was proof of her existence unraveling. Her mother entered quietly, her eyes betraying dread before a word was spoken. Lisa's voice cracked as she said, "You lied to me." Her mother's hands hovered near the counter, helpless, her lips parting with a faint whisper. "I only wanted to protect you." Lisa spun, eyes blazing, and shouted, "Protect me from what? From myself?" The silence that followed felt heavier than steel, and in it lived every unspoken secret. Tears brimmed in her mother's eyes, but she didn't speak again. Both women stood frozen, a chasm of betrayal and love carved between them, wide and merciless. Lisa slammed the door and stormed into the sharp autumn air, the world outside too bright and too cruel for the storm inside her chest. The wind tugged at her hair, scattering brittle leaves across the path as her steps carried her nowhere and everywhere. She reached the old bus stop, collapsing onto the cold bench, clutching the letter tighter than her own breath. Her body shook as she unfolded the paper again, each word carving deeper into her. A man across the street glanced at her, then quickly looked away, sensing the hurricane in her posture. Lisa whispered, "I don't know who I am," her voice a jagged break in the still air. The letter blurred through her tears, but its meaning screamed louder than her grief. Hours later, Lisa found herself in the library, the silence pressing heavier than the attic had. She spread the documents across the polished wooden table, her reflection faintly staring back from the glassy surface. Old records, faded birth certificates, names that meant nothing and yet belonged to her stared up accusingly. "Where do I begin?" she muttered, dragging her hand across her face. The librarian passed quietly in the distance, but Lisa felt as though she were utterly alone, swallowed by names, dates, and lies. Her chest tightened as she saw an unfamiliar surname scrawled beside hers. The world she had known since childhood collapsed again in silence. She gripped the edge of the table as though it were the only thing anchoring her to the present. Lisa returned home with a weight heavier than the documents she carried. She placed them on the dining table, the silence of the house screaming at her louder than any words could. Her mother sat across from her, aged by guilt and fear, her eyes refusing to meet Lisa's. "Tell me everything," Lisa demanded, her voice raw with exhaustion. Her mother's lips trembled, but no sound came. "Finally," she whispered, "you were never meant to know." Lisa's heart splintered as anger surged through her veins. "That choice was never yours to make," she replied sharply. The walls seemed to listen, every creak and groan holding judgment. Between them lay more than documents. It was a lifetime of betrayal wrapped in fragile silence. The following morning carried no comfort, only a pale sun bleeding weak light through gray clouds. Lisa sat on her childhood bed, the wallpaper peeling in tired corners, holding the locket she once thought was a treasure from her mother. Her mind screamed with questions, but her voice came out a whisper. Was it all a lie? The walls, decorated with fading photos, seemed to close in, each frame mocking her with a life that no longer belonged to her. She pressed the locket into her palm until it hurt, desperate for something real, something hers. Memories twisted cruelly, every laugh and smile suddenly stained with betrayal. Her chest rose and fell in uneven breaths as the weight of her fractured identity threatened to break her. Determined to unearth the truth, Lisa walked into the town archives, its heavy oak doors groaning as though warning her away. Inside, the smell of dust and ink filled the cavernous hall lined with endless rows of cabinets. She approached the counter, her hands shaking, and asked the archivist for birth records. The man eyed her curiously, but fetched the requested files. As Lisa opened them, her breath caught. Names she had never seen before were tied irrevocably to hers. A different mother, a different father. The blood drained from her face. Her lips parted in a trembling whisper. "Who am I?" The words hung in the stale air, louder than any scream, as the fragile threads of her world unraveled further. Lisa carried the papers to a nearby cafe, needing somewhere to sit, to breathe, to fall apart quietly. The bustle around her felt distant, muffled, like a world she no longer belonged to. She stared at the names on the documents, tracing them with her finger, searching for a connection her heart refused to recognize. A waitress asked if she was okay, and Lisa forced a hollow smile, muttering, "I'm fine," though the lie cracked with every syllable. The coffee before her went untouched, steam rising like the life she once had, vanishing into the air. Her reflection in the cafe window showed a stranger, eyes hollow, shoulders slumped, drowning in grief. She whispered, "I don't know this person." Back home, Lisa confronted her mother again, slamming the records onto the table. "You let me live a lie," she said, her voice breaking between fury and despair. Her mother's eyes filled with tears, her voice barely audible. "I was trying to save you from pain." Lisa's fists clenched, her body trembling. "You didn't save me, you destroyed me." The silence stretched unbearably as her mother collapsed into a chair, face buried in her hands. Lisa's tears finally broke free, streaking down her cheeks like fire. The house that had once felt safe now seemed like a stranger's prison, every corner echoing with betrayal. She turned away, unable to look at the woman she had called mother. Night fell, wrapping the house in shadows. Lisa lay awake, the ceiling above her blurry through her tears. The sound of the clock ticking in the hall hammered each second into her chest, like a cruel reminder of lost time. She clutched the locket again, her fingers tracing its cold edges, begging it to give her answers. Memories of her supposed childhood replayed in fragments. Birthdays, bedtime stories, whispered promises. Were they love? Or were they lies? Her chest heaved as she whispered into the silence, "I can't escape this." The darkness pressed heavier, making the air thick, and for the first time, she felt utterly alone, as though even her own identity had abandoned her. Morning light brought no clarity, only a harsher truth. Lisa left her house with the documents clutched to her chest and walked through the quiet streets. Every familiar landmark felt foreign, as though the town had betrayed her along with her family. She reached the library, its grand stone pillars rising like guardians of secrets. Inside, the scent of aged books filled the air, and she searched records of her birth family. The more she read, the more her pulse raced, names, dates, addresses that belonged to strangers but tied to her. "This can't be my blood," she whispered. Yet the truth carved its mark into her heart, undeniable and unrelenting. Her search led her to a small suburban neighborhood, where she stood before a modest brick house with curtains drawn tight. Lisa's hands shook as she approached the door. This was the address tied to her real parents. She hesitated, her knuckles hovering over the wood. Memories of her childhood clashed with images of the unknown faces awaiting her. She whispered, "What if they never wanted me?" before knocking gently. Moments later, the door creaked open to reveal an older man whose eyes widened in shock, as though he had seen a ghost. His lips parted, trembling. "Lisa." Her heart dropped into silence. Inside the house, Lisa sat stiffly on a floral couch, while the man, who introduced himself as Richard, explained in a voice broken with guilt. "We were told you died. We buried an empty coffin." Lisa's breath stuttered as she looked around at photos on the walls, family gatherings, birthdays, none of which included her. Her chest constricted, and tears welled. "So, I was never meant to know?" she asked, voice trembling. Richard's hands shook as he poured tea that went untouched. "We searched for years, but they told us it was hopeless." The air was suffocating, heavy with decades of grief and absence. Richard led Lisa upstairs to a small room untouched for years. Dusty toys lined the shelves. Faded wallpaper of stars and moons still clung to the walls. "This was your room," Richard said softly, his voice cracking. Lisa's heart pounded as she stepped inside, running her fingers across a dusty stuffed bear that seemed to recognize her touch. Memories stirred like shadows of a life she never lived. She collapsed onto the small bed, clutching the bear to her chest, tears streaming. The room smelled of dust and lost time, a place preserved in love and grief. "I don't know who I am anymore," Lisa whispered into the silence. Nightfall draped the house in silence, broken only by the hum of the refrigerator. Lisa sat at the dining table, the documents spread before her, her head in her hands. Richard sat across, shoulders slumped, his eyes red. They stole you from us, he said, the words shattering the quiet. Lisa lifted her head, her voice hollow. Then who are the people I called my parents? Her hands trembled as she pushed the papers away, unable to bear the truth written across them. The room seemed to tilt, grief and confusion, pulling her in every direction. Her chest rose with uneven breaths as despair sank deeper into her bones. Lisa woke the next morning with swollen eyes, her mind raw from the weight of truth. The world outside looked unchanged, yet for her everything had shifted. She walked to a small park nearby, her thoughts restless. She stared at the swings, imagining herself as a child who once believed her life was simple and whole. Her heart ached as she whispered, "Who was that girl?" A voice startled her. Richard had followed. He sat on the bench, his gaze fixed on the empty playground. "You were always ours," he said firmly. The conviction in his voice rattled her, stirring both comfort and pain, as if belonging could erase the years of absence. Later that day, Lisa found herself standing before the graves of Richard's wife and the daughter they thought they had buried years ago. The gravestones were cold and gray, the grass damp from a recent rain. Her chest constricted as she traced the carved name meant for her, her fingers trembling. "I wasn't supposed to be alive in your world," she whispered. Richard's eyes brimmed with tears as he said, "We mourned every birthday, every Christmas, but you were never gone from us." The words pierced her heart like a blade, grief and love, entwined in unbearable weight. The revelations gnawed at Lisa until she felt consumed by them. That evening, she confronted the couple who had raised her. She arrived at their house, her fists clenched, her breath ragged. Inside, the atmosphere was suffocating, their faces pale as she held up the documents. "Why didn't you ever tell me?" she demanded. Her mother figure's voice cracked. "We thought we were saving you. We couldn't have children, Lisa." Lisa's voice broke, her anger spilling over. "You stole my life. You stole theirs." Her words echoed through the house, shattering what little remained of trust, leaving silence heavier than any scream. The confrontation escalated, voices rising and hearts breaking. Lisa's mother figure sobbed, pleading, "We gave you love. We gave you everything we could." Lisa shouted back, "But you gave me lies." Her father's voice thundered, "We are still your parents, no matter what paper says." Lisa's chest tightened, fury and despair clashing within her. "Parents don't bury the truth," she said, her voice raw. The room quaked with emotions, decades of secrets unraveling in seconds. Tears blurred her vision as she stormed out into the night, the sound of her footsteps echoing against the pavement as rain began to fall. Lisa wandered aimlessly through the rain, her clothes soaked, her spirit heavier with each step. She found herself at the edge of a bridge, water rushing darkly below. The storm mirrored her turmoil, lightning streaking across the sky. She gripped the railing, her knuckles white, and whispered, "Who am I supposed to be now?" Her breath came in shaky bursts, her mind screaming for release. Richard's voice suddenly pierced the storm as he called her name. She turned, rain blurring her vision, and saw him running toward her, desperation etched in his face. In that moment, the question hung between life, death, and the fragile thread of belonging. Lisa spent the night trembling in Richard's guest room, staring at the ceiling as dawn crept through thin curtains. The storm outside had passed, but her inner storm raged on. She replayed every word, every lie, every moment of discovery. Her chest tightened with the weight of choosing between two families, between the past and the present. Richard entered quietly with a cup of tea, his hand shaking as he set it down. "You don't have to decide today," he said softly. Lisa's eyes filled with tears, her voice breaking as she whispered, "But the choice feels like it will tear me apart." Later that morning, Lisa walked with Richard through the quiet streets of their town. The houses felt unfamiliar, the air heavy with memory she couldn't claim. "I don't know how to step into a life I never lived," she confessed. Richard's steps slowed, his voice thick with emotion. We can't recover lost years, but we can make new ones. Lisa's eyes burned as she muttered, "What if I can't forgive them? What if I can't forgive you either?" His silence was heavy, filled with decades of pain. The weight of her words lingered in the still morning air. By afternoon, Lisa met Sarah, her childhood friend who had unknowingly been raised beside her hidden truth. They sat in a cafe, the hum of conversation around them blurred by tension. Sarah leaned forward, whispering, "You've always been Lisa to me. Nothing changes that." Lisa's lips quivered, struggling to believe those words. She said, "But everything has changed. My name, my past, my family, who I thought I was." Sarah reached across the table, squeezing her hand. "You are more than their secrets." For the first time in days, Lisa felt a faint flicker of hope beneath the crushing sorrow. That evening, Lisa returned to the house she grew up in, its walls suddenly foreign. Her adoptive parents sat in silence at the dining table, their faces weary and broken. She remained standing, her body rigid with conflict. Her adoptive mother whispered, "We never wanted to hurt you. You were the answer to our prayers." Lisa's heart squeezed, anger and love colliding in unbearable waves. "But you built it all on a lie," she said, her voice trembling. Silence swallowed the room, broken only by the sound of a clock ticking, marking the years they could never reclaim. As night fell, Lisa found herself torn between two worlds, blood and bond, truth and love. She stood at her window, staring out at the darkened streets, her reflection staring back like a stranger. Her heart raced with the impossible weight of belonging. Richard's words echoed in her mind. "We can make new ones." Her adoptive mother's words clashed against them. "You were the answer to our prayers." Tears spilled as she whispered, "Who am I if I am not theirs, and not yours, but only me?" The question lingered, unanswered, carried into the darkness of the night. The next morning, Lisa walked alone through the park where she had played as a child, every tree and bench carrying echoes of laughter that now felt distant. She whispered, "I was living a dream that wasn't mine." Her chest ached with the truth. A little girl ran past, laughing, her mother chasing her, and Lisa froze, a tear slipping down her cheek as she wondered what her own childhood might have been. The weight of lost years pressed down, yet the warmth of the sun breaking through clouds reminded her that life still offered light, even in shattered places. Later that day, Lisa met Richard once more. He sat on a bench near the edge of town, his hands trembling as he held an old photograph of her as a baby. "I lost you once," he said, his voice breaking, "but I can't lose you again." Lisa's throat tightened, her heart torn between compassion and anger. "You may be my blood, but they were my life," she said firmly. Richard nodded, tears spilling freely. In that fragile exchange, no forgiveness was given, but no hatred remained. It was an acknowledgement of pain, of love, and of a wound that time alone could not heal. At dusk, Lisa returned to her adoptive parents' home. They waited at the doorway, fear and hope etched into their faces. Her adoptive father spoke first, his voice fragile. "We love you no matter what you choose." Lisa's knees nearly buckled under the weight of his words. She stepped inside slowly, her mother's hand reaching to touch hers. This time, Lisa didn't pull away. Instead, she whispered, "I can't undo the lie, but I can't erase the love either." Their embrace was hesitant, trembling, but it carried decades of longing, forgiveness unspoken, but deeply felt. That night, Lisa sat in her room surrounded by old photographs, some of her life with her adoptive parents, some newly given by Richard. She traced the edges of each picture, her tears falling silently. The weight of two lives pressed upon her chest, yet within the storm was clarity. She was not bound to choose one over the other. She whispered to herself, "I am both stories. I am me." In that quiet declaration, her heart found fragile peace. For the first time, she no longer felt like a fractured soul, but a whole person carrying scars and love from both worlds. As dawn broke, Lisa stood at her window, the horizon painted with hues of pink and gold. The world outside was unchanged, yet she felt transformed. Her journey of truth had left wounds, but also strength. She whispered, "I am not who I thought I was. I am more." Her reflection in the glass no longer looked like a stranger but someone she could finally accept. Tears glistened on her cheeks, but this time, they were not only for grief. They were for rebirth. The silence that followed was not heavy, but sacred, a closing to one chapter, and the beginning of another.